Ready?
Hi, and welcome to the meeting of the Rotary E-Club of District 7710 for Tuesday, June 2nd, 2020. I'm Kathy Roadcup, President of the E-Club of District 7710. Thanks for joining us. Our guest speaker for this evening, Cornell W. Cox, is joining us, and Rotarian and President-elect Doris Wallace will be introducing our guest speaker this evening. Doris?
Okay, thank you. Cornell Cox is married to Jane Bourget Cox, a retired second grade public school teacher. They have 4 children, 7 grandchildren, and 4 great-grandchildren. Mr. Cox retired the last day of 2000 after 41 years career in the oil and gasoline and propane business. Until 1973, his profession also included ginning and buying cotton. Mr. Cox grew up on a small tobacco farm in the Bentonville area of Johnson County, North Carolina, and have remained a farm boy at heart. He in large part credit his father for a hard work ethic and moral compass for his success in life. Mr. Cox for many years has been an avid woodworker, building various types of furniture. Most of his volunteer public service has been through Cincinnati United Methodist Church, the Salvation Army, and his membership in the Rotary Club since 1978. And I present to you, Mr. Cox. Cornell?
Thank you, Doris. I'm delighted to be here and to present my book. The book was written actually about 4 years ago. It was released on Amazon June of 2016. The book is endorsed, one of the endorsers at least is the former governor of North Carolina, 4-term governor, Jim Hunt. He endorsed my book along with 3 other prominent people. And I would just like to ask you, have any of you, did any of you grow up on a farm?
Yes, I did.
I guess Doris was the only one.
No, I did too.
Okay, but probably not a tobacco farm?
Not a tobacco farm.
No, it was
Cotton
a strawberry farm.
Cotton.
Well, a lot of what my book is about, the importance of a tobacco economy in rural Eastern North Carolina. Johnston County was one of the 2nd largest producers of flue-cured tobacco in the state. And it was really crucially important, the economy of tobacco in the first half 20th century. So that's what a lot of my book is about. And I grew up with all of that, but it's my memoir, and this PowerPoint program doesn't really capture the full scope of the book, what it's about. But I hope you will get at least an idea of the area that I grew up on the farm and the economic climate and how things were going. So we'll begin. Oh, by the way, when I last tested this, the audio was clipping off the last the last word, I think, of each page, but maybe you can figure it out what that word is, maybe, in some cases at least. Okay, we'll begin now. Thank you.
Promise of Better Days is a charitable and educational history endeavor to preserve our cultural heritage. It's my memoirs intertwined in a tobacco legacy. My character was formed to a great extent out of the protracted Great Depression. In my case, it was an entrenched generation of pork, cotton, and flue-cured tobacco farmers struggling to work their way out of poverty. and that battle epitomized in many ways how it was that flue-cured tobacco overtook cotton as king of crops in the South during the 20th century. My name is Cornell Cox. I was born in this one-room storehouse in 1937, located on Johnston County's Bentonville Civil War battleground. In the mid-1940s, with my sister or brother, we'd walk a long path on the Confederate breastworks that ran along the Sam Howe branch, across which the war was fought. After getting to our Uncle Chester Flowers' store, we walked back home with a 5-cent block of ice in a tow bag swinging between us. We would have iced tea for dinner, a delight on some hot summer days. In the early 20th century, from this storehouse, my maternal granddaddy, Eldridge Troy Westbrook, had sold commercial fertilizer that his sons had transported by teams of mules and wagons over more than 20 miles of rough dirt roads from Goldsboro. Now, I want to carry you back to that era, over 100 years ago, post-Civil War, the last 2 decades of the 19th century. There was not a single bank in Johnston County, although across the Piedmont in eastern North Carolina, a solid base was building for an agricultural economy. 2 different crops were competing to become cash crops. Each flue-cured tobacco and cotton were getting a footing with the hope for some small measure of luxury, or in the least to save many small farm families from utter poverty. During that era into the early 20th century, many flue-cured tobacco auction markets were opening in eastern North Carolina. At the same time, cotton gins were being built. To accommodate cotton farmers and several cotton gins being built around Johnston County, in 1902, a cottonseed oil mill was built in Pine Level by William Berry Doc Oliver, the great-grandfather of Beth Wilson. In 1903, another oil mill was built in Clayton by A.J. Barber. In 1940, it was purchased by Paul Keller, who would become the stepfather of Susan. With the explosive growth of textile mills around the turn of the 20th century, cotton would be the major crop grown in North Carolina until 1919. By its peak production year, 1925, North Carolina was producing well over 1 million bales, and Johnston County was the largest producer in the state. That year, 1925, Johnston produced over 73,000 bales, ginned by approximately 36 cotton gins. The Great Depression struck. North Carolina cotton prices dropped from 15 to 9 cents per pound and remained at the lower price through the 1940s, only to rise again in the 1950s. Concurrently, the boll weevil attack. Johnston County lost population by 4,000 people in the 1950s and 60s. There were not enough hands to pick cotton. A few mechanical pickers, however, began to be used. Much of this cotton was laden with foreign impediments, causing problems for its ginning. Only a few acres could be harvested by hand pickers. Some farmers, however, still found pride in producing quality cotton, such as this uncommon farmer, Frank Holding, standing on right, with first bale of cotton gin during the 19th. All through the first half of the 20th century, cotton production on small farms had struggled to compete with tobacco as a cash crop. By the late 1960s, cotton in Johnston County was fading into oblivion. Here at Smithfield Gin Company, in 1973, we rolled the last bale off the press to be ginned in Johnston. Meanwhile, flue-cured tobacco by the 1960s was well founded as the predominant controlling economy in eastern North Carolina. During the previous several decades, tobacco had become lifeblood for small and large farm families. The tobacco economy had first begun in 1612, when John Roth, the husband of Pocahontas, shipped 200 pounds of tobacco to England. Here in the colonies, by the 17th century, tobacco became the basic measure of value, resulting in only debts contracted in tobacco to be recoverable by law, and it was the primary source of collateral offered by Benjamin Franklin when he turned to France for a loan to underwrite the American Revolution. From the 17th century, tobacco spread to Western Virginia, then production along Virginia and North Carolina Piedmont borders. From there, in the mid-19th century, stories are told of a new type of tobacco being discovered, a bright leaf lemon-colored tobacco developed by a different drying system. From that point, after the Civil War, the Dukes of Durham, along with other tobacco manufacturers, would ensure viable markets for flue-cured tobacco. And no other area of the South was more ripe for a cash crop than Eastern North Carolina. When my ancestors settled along the Neuse River, one of three Cox brothers settled at Quaker Neck in Wayne County. He, like other settlers at the time, claimed or acquired large tracts of land. These large farms were family-owned, on which many siblings were raised. North Carolina had few large plantations tended by slaves compared to South Carolina and Georgia. By 1880, my great-granddaddy, Micajah Cox, sitting here, owned about 200 acres, whereas his father, William Cox Jr., in 1850 owned over 1,800 acres. As these family farms with many children were divided into smaller and smaller tracts, economic opportunity or survival became more difficult. Cotton became more marketable in the early 20th century, but growing it on the small acres farm offered little hope for improved profit. Micajah's father, William Cox Jr., built Cox Mill mid-19th century in Bentonville on the Johnston County and Wayne County line, and along with others built this Bethany Meeting House, which brought a community of Quakers together. Both William and his son, Micajah Cox, were farmers and Quaker ministers. They were opposed to raising tobacco on moral. As flue-cured tobacco auction markets were growing by leaps and bounds, all the while the Coxes were opposed to raising tobacco. On August the 1st, 1906, a Smithfield Herald headline read, "Smithfield is ready to boom. Its tobacco market has brilliant future. It is interesting to watch this old town waked up and going ahead by sheer determination, gathering momentum for the riches which tobacco holds over her head." But nothing would be held over the head of Micajah Cox to stain his Quaker Christian character. Even so, four of his sons, who continued in farming, pictured in this family photo of 1913, went against the better nature of their father. On their small farms, economic necessity trumped moral righteousness. Tobacco became an unspoken transgression for many Christians to live conscientiously by their faith. I reflect on the dilemma of these families. For most families, tobacco's morality would not be defined in black or white. Its ethical character would be revealed in shades of. These major auction markets opened, and by 1913 others opened, or soon to be, spreading across eastern North Carolina, with the promise to lift communities out of economic despair. Harbor, Robinsonville, Williamston, Wallace, Warsaw, Whiteville, Lumberton, Fairmont, Fair Bluff, Tabor City, and Roland, just to name a few. By the early 20th century, Smithfield and Johnston County were rising from the ground floor of this new tobacco economy. Dependable, pleasing tobacco prices, however, had not become reality. A stabilized marketing system resulting in across-the-board equitable tobacco prices would not come for about another 40 years. However, an outgrowth of many tobacco-made towns sprang forth. Some economic vitalization spread through the bright leaf planting regions as cotton was on its way to. In 1905, my granddaddy, Bedford Cox, began building his home and completed the original structure in 1910. That year marked a 12-year courtship with Mittie Grantham when they married. In part by inheritance, my granddaddy was fortunate enough to own his small farm on which he grew tobacco, trying to work his way out of. During the early decades of the 20th century, tenant farmers were growing in number. By 1920, Johnston County farmers were 51% sharecroppers, while family farms with many siblings being divided into smaller and smaller tracts, more became sharecroppers. They lived on pitiful margins. They had no plow or mule. nothing to contribute to the landlord's production except their children's labor. By 1930, 59% of the farmers in Johnston County were sharecroppers, tenants, or rent. Even in the booming 1920s, North Carolina had been dubbed a poor man's paradise, with the state ranking 41st in per capita income. North Carolina in 1930 had more farmers than any state except Texas and Mississippi. Some families made choices between the cotton mill's low wages and poor living conditions on the mill hill, or to stay on the farm where tobacco was sometimes seen as the brightest. My granddaddy, Bedford Cox, like many other farmers, had experienced economic despair even before the Great Depression. Crops produced in 1919 exceeded 16 million, and by 1924 it was cut in half. Growing more severe from the Great Depression, the Smithfield Herald recorded these were the sworn sum total tobacco poundage sales for all the warehouses sold in Smithfield, 1930, 31, 32. Note the drop in the pound. By 1932, in the aftermath of the 1929 stock market crash, farm markets were severely diminished. Tobacco production continued to outpace demand, while cigarette manufacturers were enjoying record profits. The farmer was in a desolate hole with his suppliers, who had no capital to wage against a bleak economic future. Thus, most of Bedford Cox's tobacco is not sold. Tobacco hung in the curing barn for another year. No money was available to pay off the mortgage made with the Goldsboro Company to buy fertilizer. The firm picked up the wagon and horses that had been given for collateral. It was a very traumatic family experience. Although, after a few days, the firm realized there was no way to redeem or cash in their many repossessions. Few firms or people had money. The company sent word to Granddaddy that he could go to Goldsboro and get the horses and wagon. By the summer of 1933, the legal apparatus of President Franklin Roosevelt's Emergency Agricultural Adjustment Act was in place to begin its work in redemption of the South's tobacco farmer. Even so, on the South Carolina-North Carolina border market opening, buyers were taking good tobacco at low prices. Farmers and businessmen were up in arms, setting off a backlash against buyer manufacturers. 2,000 growers met in Raleigh on August 31. From this gathering of producers in crisis out of economic necessity, Governor Eringhouse took command to close the North Carolina and South Carolina markets. The first season of the AAA got off to a rough, unpredictable start. However, Bedford Cox, with a good crop, if not better prices, managed to sell the crop and pay off the mortgage. Meanwhile, 3 miles down the road at my mother's home place, the stately home her father, Eldridge Troy Bud Westbrook, built late 19th century, had a modern luminous carbide lighting system. But after the Great Depression, it would not operate because there was no money to keep it going. Adding to the economic problem, much of the land's soil had become unproductive. The Westbrook lowgrounds were a fertile land, but now it would only grow broom sedge. They didn't know it needed lime. In the early 20th century, there was not an agricultural extension service in Johnston County, and in North Carolina, soil testing did not come until 19. With tobacco's help, however, our family was able to move out of the storehouse into our unfinished new home in 1938. We walked or traveled by horse-drawn wagon on rough dirt roads and paths. We did get an education at the largest rural consolidated school in the world, Four Oaks. Our homework was done by the light of the flickering fireplace or a kerosene oil lamp until later we would get electrical. Growing up on a tobacco farm during the 1940s, 50s, and later was an exercise in work ethic and personal discipline for all farm family members in participation of production. Seed plant beds, land preparation, transplanting and cultivation, popping blossoms and suckering the plant to the exhaustive summer harvest, culminating in the tedious fall grading and tying of tobacco bundles for auction. Tobacco became the driving force for many families utilizing the labor of children to gain a small measure of luxury. My family here in 1947 was trading hands for putting in tobacco with the families of my daddy's sister and brothers. This was midsummer 1947. Only 2 months earlier, the electric lights were turned on at my home on Bentonville Cox Mill Road. At 10 years of age, it was one of the happiest days of my life, made possible by Franklin Roosevelt's rural electrification. Raising flue-cured was hard work. Before modern mechanization, tobacco proved to have the lowest return of profit per man-hour, taking as much as 500 hours per acre to get the cured tied bundles. In Rockingham County, Clay Johnson with his brothers and sisters topping and suckering tobacco in 1970. Handing and stringing tobacco in 1942 in Johnston County. Field weary croppers, Johnston County, 1942. Before a new home was built, Daddy had already built the priority structure, a tobacco barn. The barn throughout its use of 40-some years accommodated 3.5 to 4 acres of tobacco, sweet-smelling wisteria vines, which I brought from Granddaddy Cox's and planted on the hillside as a small boy, now partially conceal its view. But the good times and not so pleasant memories are never hidden from my mind's eye, recalling visions of playing in doodlebug mounds, stacking tobacco sticks, or the hard work around the barn, switching the horse's single tree from a full slide of tobacco to an empty slide to pull back to the field, handing and tying wet tobacco leaves, hanging tobacco late into the day after dark, sleepily straddling the tears early morning to get out the aromatic cured sticks, out before another long day's work. It was a happy day after the barn was loaded with tobacco. Promise of Better Days recalls many different types of curing systems and tobacco barns. Promise of Better Days gives meaning to the phrase tobacco. The importance of a tobacco economy in the 20th century meant about everything to Eastern North Carolina farmers. My first crop purchased my bicycle. Agricultural science of earlier years to develop new tobacco varieties, cultivation and growing practices, and improved methods for harvesting, led by North Carolina State College, ensured flue-cured tobacco would become a reliable cash crop. Thus, it made way for North Carolina to grow larger as a crown-holding tobacco producer state. Significantly, it was large families on small farms that brought North Carolina to this note. Members of the 1956 Four Oaks High School graduation class, tying tobacco. Their annual theme was tobacco. It illustrates the importance of tobacco for that. During the 1940s and 50s, at opening of flue-cured tobacco markets, there were Farmers' Day celebrations. In many southern tobacco towns, this float was a part of Smithfield's celebration in 1956. Many towns had renowned flue-cured auctioneers, such as Jimmy Jolliffe of Smithfield, who could sell 400 piles of tobacco an hour. Jimmy was the Tar Heel of the Week in the News and Observer in 1968. While throughout the 20th century, Johnston County would remain only second to Pitt County as the largest producer of flue-cured tobacco. Smithfield would never have more than 2 sets of buyers compared to Pitt County's 7 sets of buyers, but that's a longer story in the book. The new invention of 1954, a silent flame harvester on which I rode to crop tobacco. Edwin Thornton's crew using a case harvester, 1970. Tedious grading and tying ended in 1967. Here are some of the first sheeted, untied tobacco comes to market. Promise of Better Days will carry you through the history of critical periods to secure tobacco price equity. Finally, beginning with the Emergency Agricultural Adjustment Act, universal price parity came through governmental control of tobacco planting, and you'll learn when and how the first series study began to bring about mechanization for random leaf flue-cured tobacco harvest. Not only does Promise of Better Days appreciate the families who hoed the hard road in farm life here in the 20th century, it recognizes later years of remarkable progress in agriculture. With baling tobacco for contract sales in full force by 2004, labor for production of 1 acre was reduced from 500 hours to perhaps only 50 to 70 man hours. For over a century, tobacco market openings gave vitalization and birth to many small towns such as Smithfield. Simultaneously, community banks opened to provide a supportable financial system. The concurrent opening of the Bank of Smithfield and the Smithfield tobacco market in 1898 was no coincidence. It was the betting on tobacco. Our tobacco auction markets no longer exist, but the 1898 bank, now First Citizens, thrives as a transcontinental bank. Promise of Better Days covers a century and more of evolution to the modern. In the last part of my book, I'll carry you through a very personal autobiography. It is a continuation of my tobacco way of life. It includes my experience in the Future Farmers of America, National FFA Convention 1956. I'm in the front row, fourth from right. The young 19-year-old man on the far right, off to the back, was destined to become the 4-term North Carolina. And my remembrance of Governor Luther Hodges, a North Carolina statesman. After governor and U.S. Secretary of Commerce, he became the Rotary International President in 1967-68. Hodges, for Rotarians, brings to mind ethic. I cover a 41-year career in oil and gas, which included 18 years working for an unusual character, J. Marvin Johnson, characterized by many as eccentric. He was adept in business and politics. It was the era of OPEC oil embargo, early 1970s, a time when full-service gasoline stations were relegated to the dustbin of history. My story concludes with some thoughts about what's important in life, how having a passion in one's profession provides for a rich and more productive life. It includes family, community, and faith. Somewhat surprising to me, as my life story unfolded, the thread of my religious bearing took to a vein flowing promise of better days to the. Philosophically, I close with some thoughts about civic organizations, globalization, the future of faith, and musings on tobacco's possible redeemable value. In sharing reflections spread across several major wars with the United States' involvement, my life also has been filled with amazing innovations. I can't imagine a period that could have been more exciting. Even so, all the technological advances, instant, seamless communications around and beyond the world into the universe and travel into outer space has reached only a fraction of what is to be discovered in the future. Wonders and miraculous mysteries will be revealed and experienced by our descendants, save man's recklessness to instigate some cataclysmic world event upsetting God's cosmos. Thank you for allowing me to present this brief yet very incomplete insight to Promise of Better Days. When purchased at Amazon, 100% of the royalty goes to the North Carolina FFA Foundation. Copies may also be purchased at our local Johnston County Heritage Center, with 100% of net proceeds benefiting the center.
Okay. That's my book. Are we back?
Well,
That was fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Cornell. Would anyone like to ask Cornell any questions? Please unmute.
But it's not a question, but I do so appreciate the North Carolina history, the regional history, your personal history. And you know, I initially started my educational career as a social studies teacher, and I love the pace of your story, and I thought it was great. Good job.
Thank you. The book has 250 pictures, 124,000 words, 338 pages. So that's the size of it. Covers a lot of territory.
It sounds like it. It really does sound like it covers a lot of the your personal story, the economic situation in North Carolina. It's very well done. I enjoyed that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Anyone else with a question for Cornell?
Well, Cornell, this is Rhonda again, and I have my husband here. You probably can see him a little bit off your side. Tony. So Tony wants to ask you a couple of questions about tobacco. Go ahead.
Yes, yeah. Where I come from, Tanzania, we're still growing tobacco, and a couple companies here in America, Alliance One, they are the biggest buyer of tobacco in Africa. So we have 4 countries, Zimbabwe, Malawi, no, 3 countries, Zimbabwe, Malawi, and Tanzania, who are producing tobacco right now. And actually, they have cut all the trees to cure their tobacco. I don't know what we should do to help them stop that. And the farmers are getting nothing out of it. They are 1, 2, 3 acres, but that's the only thing they got. So what do you suggest right now? Which kind of curing should be done, at least to save our trees?
Well, you had to go to the fossil fuels source, like kerosene, fuel oil. Of course, those are out primarily. Propane is, or natural gas is what is used in the States here now. But I'm so far removed from it, but I do know that propane is still used and natural gas. That's about all that is used for the curing of flue-cured tobacco.
Okay, yeah, I think we have natural gas, but people don't know how to use it. It's gonna have to be taught how to cure that. And somebody from here maybe go teach them. So yeah, thank you for that. But I'm gonna buy your book because I wanna see the story, because the tobacco is still down there, and actually is very quiet. Nobody knows what's going on, but they're shipping all the cigarettes to Asia. And so it's very interesting for me to hear that.
So Alliance One is the big purchaser of the Tanzania tobacco.
Yes.
They are also purchasing a lot of gas or a lot of tobacco in this area. They were at least 3 or 4 years ago when I was doing some of my research. And they have cut out a lot of these small farmers, which a small farmer in this area would be like 100 or 200 acres of tobacco. I understand they are only purchasing from the larger farmers now, which have 400 and 500 or more acres of tobacco.
Very interesting.
Yeah, very interesting, because the one thing is contract farming, of which they are doing there, but a lot of farmers don't even understand that. So they give them fertilizer and some stuff, and farmers end up with nothing. So every year they are like giving them for free. They take all when it comes to buy the crop, the farmer have already spent all the money from Alliance One.
Well, is there a way, Cornell, because we're at the end of our hour, that maybe Tony could have a conversation with you
Yeah.
offline?
Yes, I think I need to talk to you.
Sure.
Okay. We'll
If
get
you,
your contact from maybe from Doris or something.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. I'll have to have like,
I'll give your contact information to Rhonda.
Wait, even my phone number.
Yeah, I will.
Yeah.
Thank you, Cornell.
thank you.
Talk your ear off, Cornell.
That's a wonderful thing.
631, 634.
All right.
Uh-oh.
So
Can you put it in the chat?
Yeah, I put my phone number in the chat.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, my husband snuck in, guys.
that's all right. Well, I'd like to take a moment and share my screen, if I may. And Cornell, we'd like, on behalf of the Rotary E-Club of District 7710, we'd like to thank you for being our guest speaker this evening. And so we'd like to hereby present you with a certificate of appreciation that is hereby granted to Cornell W. Cox for imparting valuable insights and inspiration as our guest speaker. And that's Tuesday, June 2nd, 2020. So again, much appreciation for you being with us this evening. And I would like to go ahead and Jean, if you don't mind leading us in the four-way test, sir? If you could unmute.
I certainly can.
Great.
All right. The four-way test of the things we think, say, or do. First,
Is it the truth?
is it the truth? Second, is it fair to all concerned? Third,
Will it be
build goodwill and better friendship? And fourth, will it be
beneficial to all
concerned?
Wonderful. That was great.
Good,
What a
yeah.
great collaboration, Jean and Cornell.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And that is Rotary for this evening. If you'd like to hang around and chat with us for a little bit, please feel free to do that.
Thank you for inviting me.
Well, thank you for
Cornell.
coming and being our guest speaker.
It was great, Cornell. Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Cornell.